Have you found yourself navigating a dark night of the soul? Are you craving a deeper connection with the divine feminine? Are you ready to integrate the balanced union of the masculine and feminine within? Then let's get started on the journey towards wholeness to reclaim your sovereign soul. My name is Cynthia Clark. Over the past several decades, I have undergone many dark nights of the soul. My healing journey has been a reclamation of my sovereign divinity. Whether you're just starting out on your self-healing journey or have been exploring techniques for many years, Discover Divinity offers an opportunity to uncover the new possibilities for discovering and reclaiming the innate wisdom within. It is time to discover the new possibilities. It is time to discover you. Have you ever felt like your intuition, your gifts, or your voice were somehow too much, or maybe dangerous? In this week's episode, Healing the Witch Wound, Reclaiming Your Intuition, Power, and Divine Feminine Wisdom, we are diving into the witch wound, a collective ancestral scar that has silenced women, midwives, healers, and intuitives for centuries, and how it still shows up in our lives today. I will share the history of how the divine feminine was suppressed, the ways the witch wound impacts both women and men today, and a couple practical tools to help you begin to reclaim your power. I will share a little bit of my story of being rejected for my gifts in my religious community while men were celebrated for the exact same gifts. If you are ready to peel back the layers, remember your intuition, and rise like the phoenix you are, this episode is for you. Tune in and awaken the parts of you that were never meant to be silenced. Welcome to the Discover Divinity podcast, Reclaim Your Sovereign Soul. My name is Cynthia Clark, the founder of Discover Divinity and discoveringdivinity.com. Welcome today to this sacred space. This moment right now is carved out of the noise and the rush and the responsibilities of your day. I am so grateful to have you here. Today, we are diving into something that is ancient and powerful and something that still ripples through your nervous system, your relationships, your career, your confidence, and your self-worth. We are talking about the witch wound. And I'm not talking about the spooky green-skinned villain that we were handed in our childhood. We are talking about the real witch wound. This is a collective trauma that has been carried for centuries by healers, intuitives, midwives, mystics, herbalists, priestesses, and women who dared to embody wisdom. These are the women who have dared to follow their intuition and women who dared to hold power that patriarchy couldn't control. We are talking about how this wound still lives inside of us today in our behaviors, our fears, patterns, insecurities, self-doubt, and places where we silence ourselves. And most importantly, we are going to talk about how to begin healing it. I am also going to be sharing a chapter from my own life, a story of having spiritual gifts and being rejected for them in a religious environment and watching men be celebrated for the exact same intuitive capacities that women are punished for. This episode is part history lesson, part reclamation, part healing journey, and part invitation, if you feel called, to go deeper with me and peel back the layers of your own witch wound. So take a moment and maybe just put your hand over your heart or your womb and let's begin. Today, the first thing that we're going to be talking about is what the witch wound really is. The witch wound is not just a historical concept. It's not just that memory of witch hunts, although we're going to talk about that. The witch wound is a cultural scar, a subconscious imprint, and a deep, ancient learned survival response. So it's when the inner voice says, don't be too loud. Don't be too intuitive. Don't speak up. Don't let them see your gifts. And don't trust your body. Don't outshine anyone. Don't be too confident. And don't be too mystical. There's lists of these types of statements that go on. But these are the fears that come up of being shamed or judged, mocked, rejected, exiled, or even harmed for simply being who you are. It's the fear of being a woman with power. Because for thousands of years, women's power, emotional power, intuitive power, healing power, sexual power, creative power was deemed dangerous. And not because it was harmful, but because it was politically inconvenient. Because women's wisdom was something patriarchal institutions couldn't regulate or tax or contain or dominate. This was an easy way to control the feminine by demonizing her. So this is the witch wound. And it shows up today in women who are afraid to speak their truth, use their voice, set boundaries. They're afraid to be seen. They're afraid to take up space, to call themselves healers, or to trust their own intuition, afraid to step into leadership. And even though the witch wound does affect women on a large collective level, it also shows up in men too. In the parts of them that were taught that softness is weakness, intuition is feminine, and emotions are dangerous, and the only safe identity is dominance. So this wound is collective, not just personal, and today we are going to unravel it. So let's move on to just a brief touch on history and where witch hunts fit in. As we go through the reality of history, this witch wound wasn't a metaphor. It began between the 1400s and the 1700s across Europe, and later the American colonies, maybe about an estimated 40,000 to 60,000 people were executed as witches. And here's something that most people don't know. Around 80% were women. Many were healers, midwives, herbalists, or wise women. They were often the ones that were caring for their communities, assisting births, creating remedies, offering counsel, and supporting women's health. And because their knowledge did not come from the church, because their authority didn't come from men, because their wisdom did not come from books written by male scholars, they were labeled as dangerous. This wasn't just a mass hysteria. It was a deliberate movement of social control. And so when midwives were targeted, it wasn't random. It was part of a shift where patriarchal institutions wanted monopoly over medicine, childbirth, and healing. When herbalists were called witches, it wasn't because they were harming people. It was because they were helping people without male oversight. And when intuitive women were demonized, it wasn't because they were evil. It was because their power could not be controlled. The witch hunts were not about witches. They were about silencing the divine feminine. They were about severing women from their intuition, their bodies, their medicine, their sexuality, their spirituality, and their natural authority. And the trauma from that era didn't end when the hunt stopped. It has continued throughout time with religious indoctrination, purity culture, misogynistic laws, patriarchal medicine, silencing women in spiritual roles, minimization of women's intuition, psychological conditioning, and generational trauma. And we still all feel this echo today, which brings me to something I want to share. I want to talk a moment and just speak vulnerably because my witch wound wasn't awakened by reading history books. It was actually awakened in my own life, in my religious community that I deeply cared about. I grew up with spiritual gifts, and so many of you might relate to this. That feeling of knowing things, sensing things, feeling other people's emotions, having dreams that became real, hearing guidance from the spiritual realms. For a while, I didn't even realize they were gifts. I just knew they were a part of me. But when I began sharing them, and when I began offering my insights and stepping into that role of a healer, an intuitive, a guide, and a medium, I was met with rejection. Not because I was doing anything harmful, not because I was manipulating, and not because my intentions weren't pure, but simply because I was a woman with spiritual authority. And men in that community were allowed to prophesy. They were allowed to hear from God and speak with certainty, confidence, and intuitive power. They were celebrated in that community. They were applauded, given titles, and even given microphones. But when I tapped into the same intuitive stream of that innate birthright that we all have, that divine wisdom, I was discouraged, I was dismissed, and I was shamed. I was told to stay humble, to stay quiet, to be careful, and make sure I was not deceived. There was an unspoken rule in my community that men's spiritual gifts were leadership, but as a woman, using her spiritual gifts were actually dangers. And for a while, I believed them. I shrank and I doubted myself, and I softened my voice. I asked for permission to speak things that I already knew deep within my bones, but there was something. It was like a light from within that refused to die. There was something in me that knew that the divine did not only speak through men. Something in me knew that my intuition was so sacred. It was not sinful. And at that moment, that tension or that wound is what eventually led me to awaken and to reclaim my power and my divine birthright and my spiritual gifts. Because the truth is that when patriarchy cannot control a woman's power, it calls her dangerous. And when it cannot control her voice, it calls her rebellious. When it can't control her intuition, it just calls her a witch. So my story is just one thread of a much larger tapestry, but I share it because I want you to know that if you're out there and you're listening, that you are not alone. If you have ever been dismissed or silenced or minimized or spiritually gaslit, this episode is for you. So let's dive in to how the witch wound shows up today. Let's talk about how this wound manifests in modern life, because it shows up in ways most people never think about. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fear of being too much. This is being too emotional, too loud, too intuitive, too confident, too opinionated, too sensual. The second one is self-silencing. This is holding back. This is holding back in conversations, not speaking up in group conversations or meetings, not sharing your ideas, and perhaps not being authentic or posting your truth online. Number 3 is hiding your gifts. You know within yourself that you're intuitive, but you remain quiet. You know that you're a healer, but you don't claim it. And you know you were meant to lead, but you continue to push yourself inside of a box and you stay small. And the number 4 is the fear of other women. competitive energy, comparison, belief that women aren't safe. This is a direct echo of the era when women were forced to turn on each other to survive. And as a part of this podcast, I am covering different wounds and how they affect us in today's society. And this is something I will be diving in to a future episode. So look for that episode on the sister wound. Number 5 is people pleasing. This is where we stay agreeable. We try to avoid conflict, and we go through the patterning of not wanting to upset anyone. And number 7 is the fear of being seen as witchy or woo-woo or weird, not conforming to these metaphorical boxes that have been created in the patriarchal societies. And so even though these are all just words used to police the feminine, they are a reality. These behaviors are not personality flaws. They are survival strategies that have been passed down through generations, and we see them clearly. However, we can begin to heal them. The next thing, even though there's a much longer list to the way that these things show up, those 7 are the ones that I want to highlight today, and then also get into sharing some practical tools where we can start to have the awareness to reclaim these parts of ourselves. So tool number 1 is reclaim your intuition. With the Discover Divinity podcast, Reclaim Your Sovereign Soul, reclamation is such a powerful word. And this isn't about gaining something. This is actually coming back to what is an innate birthright of who you've always been and who you always are. And so something that I suggest or invite you to do is to be able to take just a couple minutes each morning where you step into a space of reflection or meditation as your hands are over your heart, and ask yourself for the day, what do I know that I haven't allowed myself to trust? And as you just breathe and you sit with that, like the divine feminine is all about silence and reflection. When we sit in the stillness, this is when spirit will speak to us. And so as you sit in that reflective moment of the question, what do I know that I haven't allowed myself to trust? This is when that flood of information will start to come. You may hear other parts, that's just the outside noise of the mind that tends to come in and play into meditation, but just let those outside noises be there. It reminds me of a radio wave. Just allow that static to be there, but as you breathe and simply be, that's when those knowings will come. And you write down maybe words or symbols or a sentence. And remember that it's in those moments that is your intuition. That is your feminine wisdom, and that is your birthright. Tool number 2 is stop asking for permission. Anytime you catch yourself seeking approval, try replacing it with this question instead of, is this okay? With, does this align with me? And as you hear the difference between those questions, is this okay versus does this align with me? Your life shifts into a different cohesion, and you will find that you are leading a more intuitive, directive life. And then tool number 3 is being able to rewrite your story. Even though those toxic and negative patterns have shown up, being able to consciously be aware of them and recognize them is the first step. We catch them and we start to recognize, okay, is this shame-based? Is this fear-based, first of all? And when we recognize that, we can see that that is a lie. That is an illusion that's been bound or connected to these false ideologies that have been around for thousands of years. And we get to rewrite that narrative. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time for the brain and the body to catch up because the nervous system is wired to be in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn state. And so it takes time for the brain to start to hear the new messages. But as soon as you start being aware and you start catching on to what isn't an illusion, what is a lie, what is false, then you call that out for what it is. That's a lie. And then you replace it. You rewrite that narrative. And what is it that you desire instead? What would you like to create? And so maybe that includes statements like, my power is safe. My intuition is sacred. My voice is valuable and needed. My wisdom is my innate birthright, and it comes from the divine within me. And I am not dangerous. I am powerful. So remember that subconscious listens, and it just takes repetition in order to rewire. As we move into this next part, if you are driving, go ahead and just listen. But if you're in a still place, go ahead and let's drop into a deeper embodied practice. You can go ahead and close your eyes and take a slow sip of air in and exhale gently. And feel your shoulders soften. Feel your chest expand. And feel your belly relax. And imagine that you're standing in a forest, surrounded by ancient trees, covered in soft, bright green moss. See the golden light that's filtering through the branches. And ahead of you is a circle of women. Recognize them. They are the healers, the midwives, the wise ones, the mystics, your ancestors, by blood or spiritual. And they turn towards you, welcoming you. They know your story. They carry your lineage, but they have been waiting for you. And one of them steps forward. She places her hand on your heart and she whispers, your power was never the problem. Their fear was. And as you take a deep breath, feel the body and the brain gently settle. Settle the nervous system as she continues to speak to you. You are the miracle that they tried to bury. You are the flame that would not go out. And now imagine a warm golden light that is spreading from her palm into your chest, your ribs, into the trunk of your body, your arms, your legs, into that throat, your womb, and feel the light. The remembering of your power and the reclamation. Your intuition, your voice, your lineage, your divine feminine essence. Breathe it in and let it anchor inside your body today. and silently repeating to yourself in your mind, I reclaim myself. I reclaim my intuition. I reclaim my voice. I reclaim my power. And when you're ready, as you're breathing in through the nose and exhaling, slowly return to your body. And if you've had your eyes closed, you can go ahead and open your eyes. And before we close today, I desire to speak to that part of you that's still listening, that part of you that feels something moving inside of you right now. Because this episode has stirred something within you, if you have felt that remembrance or that rising, if you feel that part of yourself starting to awaken and come back online, this isn't an accident. The witch wound is layered and it is deep. It is ancestral and it is personal. And for so many of us, it has shaped the exact moments in our lives when we were told that we were too much, we were not enough, or we were dangerous simply for being who we are. And I know this wound intimately. I learned to hide those parts of my spiritual gifts. And I learned that it was safer to dim this than to be seen for who I truly was. And that was the way that the witch wound played out in my life. But even though back then I learned to hide these parts of myself, I have learned the tools and the ways to begin to trust that intuition, those spiritual gifts within, and to feel safer each day in my authenticity and rising above the witch wound. And I do want to let you know that it is possible. It is possible to rise above the wound of being punished for your power, or being rejected for your wisdom, or being separated from your own sacred divine feminine nature. The wound is not the end of your story. It really is that reflection and that beginning of the reclamation. And this moment where you're at right now, listening to these words, feeling something awaken, this is the energy of the phoenix. This is the rising, and you do not have to rise alone. If you feel called to peel back the layers with me, I will assist you and guide you as you explore your own witch wound that is woven into your relationships, your work, your creativity, and your self-trust. If you are ready to step into your power more fully and dissolve that fear, the silence, and the inherited doubt, I would be so honored to walk that journey with you. And this is the work that I am devoted to. This is the path that I walk with women and with men who are ready to reclaim their intuitive nature, guiding them back home to the parts of themselves that we're taught to fear. So if your body feels a yes, if your intuition is nudging you, if your heart feels warm or open, or even curious to what a session would look like, I invite you to reach out. You are not meant to do this alone. You are meant to return to your power, and you are meant to rise. So thank you again for joining the Discover Divinity podcast, Reclaim Your Sovereign Soul. And thank you for being brave enough to reclaim what was always yours. So until next time, may your power return to you. May your voice be heard. May your intuition be trusted. And may the divine feminine rise in you again. Thank you for listening to the Discover Divinity podcast. If this podcast resonates with you, I invite you to check out discoveringdivinity.com. You will find resources to reclaim your sacred, sovereign spirituality. Here, you can join the Discover Divinity community, where we have free online community classes, as well as done-for-you courses and programs. Navigating the unique personal path to wholeness can feel overwhelming at times. If you would like further support or are ready to take your healing empowerment to the next level, I offer one-on-one intuitive sessions in a variety of different packages where we will discover, release, create, reclaim. Discover your innate wisdom that lies within. Release the imbalances that prevent you from living your truth. Create harmony in body, heart, mind, spirit, energy, and relationships. Reclaim your sovereign soul. It is time to discover new possibilities. It is time to discover you.